Chapter 1. A bat flitted past Torak as he drew an arrow from his quiver. Wolf raised his muzzle and sniffed the breeze. He glanced at Torak, then into the thicket. There! They crept between tangled alders, Torak squelching knee-deep in black water, Wolf's big paws making no sound. Torak picked a hair off a twig, coarse, reddish-brown. Elk calves are reddish-brown. The calf's mother must have hidden it in the thicket while she went to graze. Torak glanced over his shoulder at the lake. Elk can swim deep under water. She could be anywhere, diving to the bottom to uproot water lilies with her tongue. Wolf froze, paw raised, ears ramped forwards. Dimly through the trees, Torak made out a calf-shaped darkness. The calf whined and wobbled to its feet. It was as tall as a horse. One chop of its front hooves could split his skull. As Torak knocked the arrow to his bow, Wolf gave a warning off, and then another elk exploded in the lake in a chaos of white water and flailing hooves. Torak dodged. She cracked a trunk by his head. Wolf leapt and sank his fangs into her pendulous nose. She swung him high. He clung on. Torak couldn't get a clean shot, couldn't risk hitting his pack brother. With a twist and a heave, the elk sent Wolf flying. He hit a tree with a yelp. Torak floundered towards him. Mother and calf had disappeared into the forest. Groggily, Wolf lurched to his feet and wagged his tail. Torak gave a shaky laugh. That was close. Renn would tease him when she heard how he'd nearly been brained by an elk. As he was leaving the thicket, he saw a Willow clan hunting party, 2 women and 2 men, bearing a roebuck's quartered carcass. Wolf vanished into the forest, as he did when strangers approached, but Torak put his fist to his chest in friendship. On impulse, he asked if they'd seen his mate. "Renn, of the Raven clan," he called. "She's been to see them, but she's coming back today." One of the men turned, and in the dusk his clan tattoos were stark, 3 willow leaves between his eyes, like a permanent frown. "Saw her a couple of days ago," he called back. "Long way, downriver." "Oh, then it wasn't her. The ravens are camped upriver." The man's frown became real. "I know who I saw. Red hair, her uncle's Finkedin, the raven leader. Summer before last she mated with the spirit walker, the boy who talks to wolves. That would be you." His eyes narrowed, and he touched a bone amulet on his jerkin. "Stay away." "Looked like she was going on a journey," a woman sneered. "She was paddling a canoe. Had a pack, had a sleeping sack." Torak bristled. "Then it definitely wasn't her." The woman sniggered. "Maybe she's tired of you." Laughing, they went on their way. Torak was still irritated when he reached camp. It was in darkness, no welcoming firelight, and no Renn. Neither Wolf nor his mate Dark Fur had returned from the hunt, but the cubs pounced on Torak, leaping at his chest and whining for food, while their elder brother Pebble gave him a distracted greeting. Pebble took his cub-watching duties seriously and rarely relaxed. In the shelter, Torak found the double sleeping sack as he'd left it, although slightly chewed. He felt a twinge of unease. It was the cloudberry moon, when parts of the river were still choked with salmon, and salmon means bears. Renn said Torak worried too much about bears. Torak said she would worry too, if her father had been killed by one. But she could look after herself. She was the best shot in the forest with a bow and arrow. She'd be annoyed if he went to find her. The wind rose, blowing thistledown in his face like summer snow. The pines stirred restlessly. They knew something was wrong. Tracking was what Torak did best, and even by starlight he found Renn's 3-day-old trail. To his alarm, it didn't lead towards the valley where her clan was camped, but down to the river Blackthorn, where he and Renn kept their canoe. The canoe was gone. Drag marks and bent twigs told him that Renn had paddled downriver, just as the willow man had said. She was going on a journey. She had a pack and a sleeping sack. This was all wrong. It couldn't be Renn. She would have had to make that gear in secret, scraping and sewing reindeer hides for the sleeping sack, weaving willow withes for the pack. She would have had to deceive Torak for days. No, it couldn't be true. Renn wouldn't do that. She wouldn't leave him without a word. But she had. Many lights and darks ago, when Wolf was a cub, his father and mother and packmates were drowned by a terrible fast wet. Wolf had been frightened and hungry until tall Tailless had come. They had been pack brothers ever since. Tall Tailless wasn't a real wolf. He walked on his hind legs and had neither fur nor tail, but he had the heart and spirit of a wolf, and he was part of the pack. Together he and Wolf had hunted their first deer. They'd fought demons and other bad things. They'd found mates. But even though Wolf was one breath with his mate and cubs, he'd always known that it was his purpose to be with tall Tailless and protect him. This was what Wolf was for. The hot, bright eye was rising in the up as Wolf and his mate trotted back to the den with their bellies full of salmon. The cubs attacked them with eager snuffle licks and hungry whines. Me first, jostling, shoving. They gulped the delicious, sicked-up fish, then collapsed in a pile and fell asleep. Wolf's mate lay with her muzzle between her paws, and even the older cub snoozed, but Wolf was restless. Something wasn't right. He felt it in his fur. The pines guarding the den were moaning. What had they sensed? Now Wolf felt it too, a shadow and a threat, some creature in the forest that didn't belong. He caught no whiff of demon, but his flanks throbbed from old wounds, and suddenly he knew, with the strange certainty that came to him at times, that tall Tailless needed him. As Wolf raced uphill to catch the scents, his keen ears caught the sounds of the forest, a lynx sharpening her claws in the next valley, 2 stallions fighting many lopes away. But where was tall Tailless? Wolf swerved to avoid a bear clawing an ant's nest. The bear lashed out. Wolf dodged with scornful ease. He wasn't afraid of bears. He wasn't afraid of anything except losing his pack brother. At the edge of the cliff he skittered to a halt. Far below, the fast wet foamed angrily between rocks. Tall Tailless sat on a log, pushing himself through the wet with a stick. "Wait for me," Wolf barked. But his pack brother's ears weren't as keen as his. He didn't answer. Wolf put up his muzzle and howled. "Wait for me!" Tall Tailless howled a reply. "Go back to the den. You can't come." "Wait!" howled Wolf. "You can't come!" Wolf was stunned. Tall Tailless was leaving the pack. Leaving Wolf? Wolf ran in circles, mewing in distress. A wolf does not abandon his pack. Tall Tailless could not leave. But neither could Wolf. He had to look after his mate and cubs. And yet Tall Tailless needed him. Wolf didn't know what to do. His mate appeared in the bracken, panting, her black flanks heaving. "Go," her bright eyes told him. "The older cub will take turns with me to hunt and watch the young." Wolf ran to her and touched noses. "I come back." "I know." Wolf couldn't find a way down the cliff, and the fast wet was carrying Tall Tailless away. Wolf raced along the cliff top, leaping logs, splashing through bogs. He was falling behind. In desperation, he scrambled over the cliff edge and slid, digging in his claws, bashing into thorn bushes. The fast wet swept Tall Tailless round a bend. Wolf lost his grip and fell head over paws off the cliff. Long after Wolf had been left behind, his anguished howls still rang in Torak's ears. He hated leaving Wolf, but he couldn't ask him to abandon Dark Fur and the cubs, and they couldn't come too. Torak had to travel fast to have any chance of finding Renn. If only he'd been able to make Wolf understand. But how could he, when he didn't understand himself? He'd set off the moment he'd discovered the canoe was gone, struggling on foot along the thickly wooded riverbank. No point returning to camp. He always carried what he needed to survive: axe and knife, bow and arrows, slingshot, waterskin, strike fire, tinder pouch, sewing kit, medicine horn. He'd made little progress, and when he'd found a boar-clamped dugout in the shallows, he'd taken it. Stealing a boat is almost as bad as stealing an axe. Torak told himself he could make amends later. The dugout was ridiculously clumsy, nothing like the nimble deer-hide craft he'd made with Renn. At times he paddled through a choking stink of salmon, the shallows clogged with rotting fish and black with ravens. Rip and Wreck weren't among them. Torak hoped they'd gone with Renn. Ravens are wary, very good at warning of danger. He also passed bears, but they were too busy feasting in the light summer night to trouble him. A family of otters rose on their hind legs to watch him go. Their fur glinted with fish scales, reminding him with a pang of Wolf's fishy breath when he'd been hunting salmon. At daybreak, Torak found an inlet where Renn had camped. He knew it was her by the tiny flakes of flint where she'd sharpened an arrowhead, and her footprints were as familiar as his own. Rainwater in her tracks, a fox's paw prints crossing the ashes of her fire. She'd camped here 2 nights ago, and made no attempt at concealment. She knew Torak was too good at tracking to be fooled. Or did she want him to follow? Maybe she'd left him a sign. When they were apart, they sometimes kept in touch by scratching marks on the pale undersides of horse-hoof mushrooms. The marks quickly turned brown and didn't fade. Torak found plenty of mushrooms on tree trunks, but no marks underneath. Distractedly, he scratched the scar on his forearm. Renn's sign shouted at him from a boulder in the shallows, a raven's foot chalked in white pointing upriver. "Turn back. Find the white raven." Torak chewed his lip. Why tell him to seek their friend Dark? This was hopeless. Renn could be anywhere. She could have hidden the canoe and headed on foot for any of the countless valleys of the open forest, or for Lake Axehead, or the deep forest, or the mountains, or the sea. Without knowing why she'd left, he was travelling blind. He began to be angry. Come on, Renn, this isn't funny. Nevertheless, he decided to follow her sign. Struggling against the current was hard work, and as the day wore on, his shoulders began to cramp. Mist filled the valley. Dusk crept up the pines. He shivered. No warmth in his eelskin jerkin and knee-length leggings, and this summer he hadn't bothered to make boots. Barefoot and without a sleeping sack wasn't the best way to start a journey, especially in the northernmost part of the forest. At last he glimpsed a white raven in a willow, a sure sign that Dark was nearby. As Torak hauled the hated dugout up the bank, the bird greeted him with an echoing "ark" and flew into the forest. Torak followed her to his friend's camp, in a dim glade guarded by watchful birch trees. Dark sat by his fire with his mage's drum on his knees. On it he'd scattered the little slate creatures he loved to carve, aurochs, beavers, vipers. His strange white head was bent, and he was making the creatures dance by tapping the drum with a swan's thigh bone. He'd set a salmon to roast and ground a pouch full of earth blood. A pile of the crumbly, dark red stone lay beside him, and he was covered in reddish dust. Ark had taken on a pink tinge as she perched on his shoulder, busily preening her feathers. At Torak's approach, Dark raised his head. For a moment his pale eyes were as remote as mountains. Then he saw who it was, and his face lit up. Torak stepped into the firelight. Dark's smile faded. "Ah, so. She's gone." Torak stared. "You knew?" Dark sucked in his breath. "What's this about?" cried Torak. "Where'd she go?" "I don't know where, but I think I know why." Chapter 2. Torak prowled the glade, slashing bracken with a stick. "You knew, and you didn't tell me." "Renn asked me not to," said Dark. "You're supposed to be my friend." "She's my friend too." "Keeping secrets? Talking behind my back?" "It wasn't like that. And stop hitting the bracken. You're frightening Ark." Strangers meeting Dark saw an odd-looking boy, with long white hair and eyes like a sky full of snow. They mistook his gentleness for weakness, but soon realized their error. He'd been born without colour and abandoned by his father when he was 8. For 7 winters he'd survived on his own in the mountains, his only companions, a white raven he'd rescued from crows, and his sister's ghost. 2 summers ago the Raven clan had taken him in and made him their mage. He was still getting used to living with people in the forest, and sometimes he went off for a few days alone to clear his head. Torak flung away the stick and glared at the fire. "Tell me why she left." With his knife, Dark speared a salmon eye and offered it. Torak scowled, so Dark ate it himself. "She said things kept happening that she couldn't explain." "What things?" "A spring trap she forgot to warn you about, and that time she nearly shot you when you were hunting." "These were accidents." "She didn't think so. She said there's something inside me that wants to hurt Torak." "What? Renn would never hurt me." "I know, but she's terrified that she might. She said she has to find out what it is and make it stop. She thinks," his voice dropped, "it might have something to do with her mother." The birch trees whispered in alarm. The white raven crested her head feathers and croaked. Torak met Dark's eyes. "But the Viper Mage is dead." "I know. That's what Renn told me." Torak rubbed his hand across his mouth. "And you've no idea where she's gone?" "She said the signs all point one way, but she wouldn't say where." "I've been seeing signs too, and just now my drum told me something weird. The demon that's not demon. I don't have time for mages' riddles. And I keep seeing tusks." He pointed at a tree where he'd left a small slate weasel as an offering. Shadows of twigs had given it horns. "I see them in clouds, in eddies in the river. Huge twisted tusks, much bigger than a boar's." "I don't care about tusks. I need to find Renn." "But Torak, they're linked. The tusks have something to do with her. I can feel it." "Do a finding charm. Do it now." "She doesn't want you to find her. That's why she left without telling you, because you'd insist on going too, and she couldn't take that risk." "Just do the charm." Dark opened his mouth, then shut it. "I don't need to. Look at the sky." Above their heads, the first tree glowed luminous green. Its shimmering branches held the moon and the stars, and its unseen roots trapped demons in the other world. Torak felt the hairs on the back of his neck prickle. The first tree shone brightest on dark winter nights and rarely showed itself in summer. It had appeared for a reason. He saw from Dark's rapt expression that he thought so too. As they watched, the green lights faded, and all that remained was a single shining bough, arching like a vast arrow across the deep blue sky. North, said Torak. It's telling us she's gone north. A long way north. Torak glanced at him. You don't mean the far north? She'd never try that on her own. Even further. I can feel it. But what could be further than the far north? Ark cawed a greeting, and they saw Finkedin at the edge of the glade. Leaning on his staff, the leader of the Raven clan limped towards them. Silver glinted in his dark red hair and his short, straight beard. Firelight carved his features in shadow and flame. Beyond the far north, he said, is the edge of the world. Dark set a log by the fire, and Finkedin sat, putting his hand to the old wound in his thigh. His one-eared dog sniffed the salmon, then caught Finkedin's glance, and lay meekly at his feet. Dark sat too. Ark flew to a tree and glared at the dog. Torak stood, clenching and unclenching his fists. The far north was an icy, treeless waste, ruled by the north wind and haunted by great white bears. He and Renn had been there once. They'd been lucky to escape with their lives. Tell me about the edge of the world. Have you been there? Finkedin shook his head. But when I was younger, I hunted in the far north with the White Fox clan. They told me what they knew. So now you can tell me. First, you must eat. I'm not hungry. You look as if you haven't eaten in days. Sit, eat. You too, Dark. And while you're eating, tell me about Renn. When Finkedin spoke, people obeyed. Torak flung himself down and glowered at the fire. He discovered he was ravenous and fell on his share of the smoke-blackened salmon, while Finkedin listened to Dark. He was Torak's foster father, but he hadn't greeted him as he usually did by touching foreheads. Torak wondered if Finkedin blamed him that Renn was gone. Dark finished speaking. Finkedin turned to Torak. And Renn never told you anything? Nothing, muttered Torak. Twice he'd woken in the night to find her staring into the dark, but he thought she was missing her clan. She preferred to camp near them, while he loved living with the wolves in the lonely valleys. Sometimes they'd fought about that. You never sensed something was wrong? Finkedin's voice was sharp. You're saying it's my fault that she left? Are you? Torak met his vivid blue, freezing stare. I thought we were happy, he said. Tell me about the edge of the world. The Raven leader held his gaze a moment longer. None who seek it have ever returned. But it's said that the sea pours endlessly into the void. Stories tell of an island near the edge. Its rivers boil, its mountains spew fire. It's guarded by the spirits of huge creatures who died long ago. Torak swallowed. How do you reach it? Finkedin lifted his broad shoulders. The old stories say it's across the sea, beyond the northernmost cliffs of the far north. He turned to Dark. That's why I came to find you. After you told me of your visions, I remembered something. The Narwhal clan hunts along that coast. Their speech is different from ours, and they build their shelters from the bones of huge hairy monsters as tall as trees, and from their tusks. I've seen such creatures in my dreams, cried Dark. But I can never sense where they live. They don't seem to belong anywhere, not to the forest, the mountains, or the sea. How can that be? They have to live somewhere. They belong to the deep past, said Finkedin. They lived during the Great Cold, but the ancestors killed too many and they died out. Now and then a narwhal hunter finds a carcass frozen in the earth. These ancient creatures are sacred. Narwhals call them mammoth. Torak jumped to his feet and slung his quiver over his shoulder. Well, if they all died out, we don't need to worry about them. Finckedin faced him across the crackling heat. You're not going after her. She's got 4 days' lead. I'm not waiting any longer. How about trusting Renn to know what she's doing? I do trust her. I trust her with my life. But something is driving her to the edge of the world, and whatever it is, she isn't going to face it alone. Chapter 3. The north wind rushed, screaming over the fells, savaging the forest and warning Torak back. Before him, the desolate shore and the sounding sea. Ahead, the empty lands, and beyond them, the far north, where ice bears hunted people as if they were prey. Renn was heading there alone. Until he'd met her, Torak had never had a friend. For 5 summers they'd shared secrets and danger. The flash of her dark red hair in the green forest lit his spirit as nothing else could. He'd made it to the mouth of the river in a day, Finckedin having relented and given him his own deer-hide canoe, saying he'd returned the stolen dugout to the Boers. Too exhausted to build a proper shelter of saplings, Torak carried the canoe into the forest and upended it. He would sleep beneath, and he wanted a last night under trees. After hastily waking a fire for company, he checked his gear, flint-tipped arrows, spare bowstrings of braided deer sinew, pebbles for his slingshot. He stuffed thistledown in his tinder pouch, made needles of split gull bones from a skeleton on the shore, and slotted them into his wing-bone needle case. He would hang everything on his belt, in case he capsized. He'd need an ice shield, too. Though it was summer, Finckedin had warned of icebergs, and Torak had been snow-blind. It had felt as if someone was rubbing grit in his eyes. Muttering thanks to a birch tree, he peeled a strip of bark and cut 2 eye slits. A while back he'd lost his headband, but he wouldn't bother making another. If the circle tattooed on his forehead disconcerted people, too bad. Dark had given him his sleeping sack, and beaver-hide boots, as well as some dried salmon cakes, and a thick coil of auroch gut sausage, but these he would save for the journey. He found burdock stems and horse mushrooms and munched them raw, spitting out maggots. As an offering he tucked a piece of mushroom in the fork of a rowan. "Forest," he prayed, "you've helped me all my life. Help me find Renn. Keep her safe." But what power could the forest have in a treeless land ruled by ice, wind, and waves? The light was beginning to die. The clans know that this is when demons lurk, hiding in darkness, breathing malice and despair. Demons are hard to see, and you rarely catch more than a glimpse of the corner of your eye. Renn had a mage's sense for them, and Wolf knew when they were near. Torak had come to rely on them both. Dark had given him a pouch of ground earth blood. "You can trade it for warmer clothes on the coast, but keep some on you, always." "You think I'll need it?" Torak had asked. "The demon that is not demon. I don't know what that means, but earth blood might protect you. May the Guardian fly with you, Torak. And with you." Torak filled his medicine horn and dabbed earth blood on the small slate wolf he wore at his neck, and on the greenstone wrist guard, which Finckedin had made for Renn, and she'd given to him. He lay in Dark's sleeping sack, watching the glimmer of firelight through the canoe, and trying not to think of the double sleeping sack he'd shared with Renn. He touched the scar on his forearm. He'd got it when he was 12 summers old, the night the demon bear killed his father. He remembered running from the wreck of the camp he'd built with Far, collapsing against an oak tree, staring numbly into its branches. For the first time ever he'd been truly alone. He was alone again now. Beyond the creak and murmur of the forest, he heard the endless soughing of the sea. He hated to think of Renn paddling north at the mercy of the sea mother, who lives in the deeps and is beyond good and evil, who kills without pity or warning. An owl hooted. Embers crackled. Wolf called Fire the bright beast that bites hot because he'd burnt his paw when he was a cub. Torak missed him. The ticklish warmth of nibble licks, the meaty smell of his big rough pads. He missed everything that was mysterious and unknowable about his pack brother. Wolf came and went as silently as mist. His ears were so keen he could hear the clouds pass. His nose so sharp he could scent the breath of a fish. If Torak was merely thinking of setting off on a hunt, Wolf would open his amber eyes. "Let's go." Sometimes Wolf knew how he felt before he felt it himself. Torak woke to the certainty that he was being watched. It wasn't some inquisitive badger. The forest was quiet, too quiet. Silently, drawing his knife, he crawled from under the canoe. He rose to his feet. The brief summer night was nearly over. The forest was full of shadows. A spruce branch tapped a warning on his shoulder. He turned. A magpie lit onto a branch, showering him with dew. He breathed out, and the feeling was gone. On the beach he startled a pair of oyster-catchers who flew in circles, loudly scolding him for getting too near their nest. Behind him the forest was a wall of darkness. Ahead, sea and sky were a dismal grey blur. Trees, rocks, river and sea, they'd all seen Renn pass, but they weren't telling. Torak's spirit sank as he thought of the days ahead, seeking a girl who didn't want to be found. Wolf appeared silently, as wolves do, and stood on the rocks 30 paces away. Dew beaded the silver fur on his flanks, the black fur on his head and shoulders, his russet-rimmed ears. Normally he would have bounded to Torak and greeted him with tail-lashing and rubbing, licking and nuzzling. When he didn't, Torak halved the distance between them and sat on a mound of dried kelp. Wolves don't only speak with howls and grunts and whines, but with their whole bodies. Although much of wolf talk is subtle and easily missed, it was plain what Wolf was saying. His tail pointed stiffly at the sky, and he was staring stonily at the sea. "You left me. I'm cross." Torak couldn't speak wolf as well as a real wolf. He couldn't apologize by sleeking back his ears and tucking his tail between his legs. Kneeling, he uttered a low grunt whine. "Sorry." Wolf twitched one ear and went on staring at the sea. Still cross. Torak sat next to him. He rubbed his shoulder against Wolf's. Wolf slammed him with his hindquarters, knocking him into the kelp. He growled and soft-bit Torak's upper arm, worried it, released it, without a mark. Torak noticed a fresh scab on Wolf's left foreleg. He shot Wolf a glance. "How?" "Fell." Sensing embarrassment, Torak didn't ask more. Some things take ages to say in person talk, but a wolf can say them in a tail flick. Others he can't say at all. Torak couldn't explain why Renn had left or where they were heading. He could only tell Wolf that the pack sister was many lopes away, and he missed her. Wolf leant against him and licked his chin. "Me too." A wolf does not abandon his pack. Torak knew what a wrench it had been for Wolf to leave Dark Fur and the cubs. Burying his face in his pack brother's scruff, he sniffed Wolf's well-loved smell of sweet grass and warm fur. He felt the tickle of whiskers and teeth as Wolf gently nibbled his ear. He felt better than he had since Renn had left. "I'm with you," said Wolf. "We find the pack sister together." The demon sneers at the fawning wolf and the trembling boy. They are anxious and frightened, flawed, imperfect, weak. All living creatures are weak. The Raven leader is weak because he rules his clan by persuasion, not force. The girl is weak because she is a mage, yet fears to wield her power. The boy is weak because he loves the girl. The demon despises love. Love is weakness. It makes the living easy to control. Now Boy and Wolf are back in the forest, the boy gathering his gear, the wolf sniffing the canoe. The wolf is able to smell lesser demons, the snickers and scurriers, but it cannot smell the demon. The demon is cleverer and stronger than all living things. It hates and hungers for their shining souls. It longs to grind and shred, to feel their thrashing and shrieking in endless pain. But the demon cannot feed, for the demon is not free. The demon must be free. The demon shall be free. Chapter 4. The seal knew it was too big for Renn to kill. As she paddled nearer, it went on basking on the iceberg, while behind it a flock of kittiwakes settled for a rest, a sunny day, a calm sea. But suddenly the seal hoisted itself off the ice and slid under the waves. Renn heeded the warning and swerved. The kittiwakes shot mewing into the air as the iceberg tipped over with a crash, sending a wave that nearly swamped the canoe. While Renn struggled through rocking shards of ice, the kittiwakes landed on a distant blue floe. Seabirds can rest anywhere. She could not. She'd hardly slept in days and was losing track of time. As she'd followed the coast north, she'd passed snow-covered mountains and vast silent valleys, no forest to protect her, and no night. The cold white sun never set. The strip of shingle under the cliffs was scarcely wide enough for the canoe, but she couldn't put it off any longer. She'd been relying on her ice shield. As a disguise, she had to go further, or risk some meddlesome hunter wondering what a girl from the forest was doing in the far north. Rip and Wreck swept past, scattering the kittiwakes. The ravens were making cuckoo calls. Renn wished they wouldn't. It only heightened the strangeness of this strange land. Hating what she was about to do, she crouched in the shelter of a rock. On a stone she ground lichen with dried elderberries from the forest, mixed them with seawater in her birch-bark baler, combed the black dye through her long red hair. The wind chilled her scalp. Despite her reindeer fur clothes, she shivered. Next she must hide her Raven clan tattoos, the 3 blue-black bars on her cheekbones. In a clamshell she blended wood ash with deer fat and smeared it on her face as if she was mourning the dead. Now for her clan creature feathers sewn down the side of her parka. She couldn't bear to remove them, so she covered them by sewing sea-eagle feathers on top. Finally she used the last of the dye to paint the back of her hand with the 4-toed mark of the sea-eagle clan. "There," she said shakily, "you're not Renn of the Ravens, you're Ryu of the Sea Eagles." She'd chosen the Sea Eagles as they got on with everyone, but it didn't help. Never had she disguised herself so completely. She betrayed her clan and disrespected another, and by changing her name she'd gone even further. Your name is yourself, held in the sand. If you change it, you change your luck. But what else could she do? Torak would come after her. She had to make sure he didn't find her. A seal bobbed up in the shallows. It was the same one who'd warned her about the iceberg, wise brown eyes, bushy whiskers like a gruff old man. It gave her a penetrating look and dived, flicking up its tail flippers. It didn't like what it saw. Renn whistled for Rip and Wreck. The ravens dropped down from the cliffs, then veered off with startled chord. "Rap, rap, stranger! I'm not a stranger, it's me!" But they were gone. They didn't know who she was. The morning masks were stiffening on her cheeks. She felt sick. Her name-sole was coming loose. For comfort she wound Torak's headband around her temples. She wondered if he'd guessed that she'd taken it. She'd needed something of his to keep her company. Water was lapping her boots. The sea mother was breathing out, sending in the tide. You can't stay here. As Renn pushed off, she saw a face in the water. The girl who stared back at her had long black hair and pale, stern features. She didn't recognize herself. She had become her mother. Seshru, the Viper Mage. You are not your mother, Dark had told her, but I have her marrow in my bones. Maybe that's why this is happening. You don't know that. I saw a viper in a row, and vipers don't climb trees. He blew stone dust off the pine marten he was carving. When I was born, my mother named me Swan Clan. I don't like being Swan. They abandoned me, but I can't change who I am. I can only change what I do. Your mother wasn't a soul-eater. She didn't kill people. He looked at her through his cobwebby hair. Is she why you haven't done magecraft for 2 summers? You're still afraid of becoming like her? I don't need to do magecraft. You're wrong. His severity made her blink. People need healing, Renn, and they need help finding prey. If we all refuse to do magecraft, how would the clans live? There's something inside me that wants to hurt Torak. I have to find out what it is and make it stop. Magecraft could help you do that. I don't need spells to tell me where to go. I see signs wherever I look. Be careful, Renn. Magecraft is a force like a river. If it's held back, it turns dangerous. Maybe he was right. But a few days later, she'd had the dream that had forced her to leave. Standing in a cave of ice, holding Torak's heart in her hands. She woke with a jolt, slumped over her paddle. She had to find a campsite, or she'd fall overboard. It had been winter when she'd been here last, the sea frozen, the land a howling wilderness of snow. She'd been shocked to recognize nothing. Even keeping the coast on her right was hard, all these rocky islands littering the sea, like flakes of flint, dropped by the world spirit, sharpening his axe. Without the North Star to guide her, she'd reckoned by the sun, and when she couldn't see it, by the stunted bushes, cowering from the wind. That was one thing that hadn't changed, the power and anger of the wind. With no forest to stop it, it came rushing down from the mountains to attack the fells, where dwarf, willow and birch flattened themselves against the ground, and even rocks huddled together. The sun became fierce. Soon Renn was sweating under her clothes. When the sun went in, she would be chilled, and a white fox hunter had told her once that it isn't cold that kills, it's wet. She passed cliffs clamorous with seabirds and reeking of droppings, nowhere to camp. In the next bay, a grey whale lay rotting on the shore. The stink was stomach-churning. Yet still she hesitated, until a great white bear ambled from behind the carcass, snuffed her scent and glared. Clouds hid the sun, and it started to snow. In the far north the weather changes with unnerving suddenness, spring, summer, autumn, and winter in a single day. She reached a black beach, strewn with icebergs. On a ridge above the tide line she spotted 3 hunched boulders that might provide shelter. The ridge was taller than it had appeared from the sea. She was standing beneath it when she noticed there were 4 boulders. There had only been 3. She glimpsed a movement. She edged away. The hidden people live in rivers and rocks, and they look like us, except when they turn their backs, which are hollow as rotten trees. They hate being seen, and you must take care not to anger them by camping too close to their rocks. Renn put her fist to her heart and bowed. I'm sorry. I'll go. A 5th boulder appeared. No, not a boulder. A creature she'd never seen before. As big as a bison and immensely shaggy, its lugubrious brown face was flanked by massive, downwards curving horns. It was molting, blonde wool clotting its humped shoulders and hanging almost as far as its surprisingly small, neat hooves. Renn had heard about musk oxen from Dark. If you keep your distance, they probably won't attack, although they're very bad-tempered, so sometimes they do. It's fine to gather their wool snagged on bushes, but don't ever hunt them. They belong to the hidden people. Renn stepped backwards. I'm not after your prey, she told the dwellers in the rocks. The musk ox snorted. It lowered its head and pawed the ground. She raised her hand. Look, I'm walking to my canoe. A second musk ox appeared, then 3 more. They stood in a row, staring at her amid clouds of breath. She floundered through mounds of kelp. The musk oxen leapt down from the ridge as nimble as deer and moved towards her. I'm sorry, she shouted, digging in her paddle. Balefully they watched till she was gone. The snow turned to sleet, stinging her face and trickling inside her reindeer fur mittens. She was beginning to despair of finding a campsite when she came to a bleak islet with a lake shivering in the middle. Dizzy with exhaustion, she hauled the canoe behind some rocks by the lake, having first checked that they were rocks, not musk oxen. She didn't sense any hidden people, but she couldn't be sure. The sleet eased. Clouds of midges whined in her ears and crawled up her nose. She'd eaten all her forest food, so she trudged down to the sea with her fishing gear, baited her hooks with limpets, and set her lines. Renn knew the ways of the sea. She'd been fostered with the whale clan when she was 9, but only now did she remember that if you mix things from the forest with those of the sea, you risk offending the sea mother. Every piece of her gear came from the forest, her yew-wood bow and dogwood arrows, her reindeer fur parka and leggings, beaver hide boots, sleeping sack, pack, canoe. Her fishing hooks were thorns lashed with spruce root, the lines horsehair, the floats pine bark. The only things that wouldn't offend the sea mother were the bait and the sinkstones. Biting her lips, she pulled in the lines and trudged up to the lake to start all over again. She knew she wasn't thinking straight. Her head was buzzing with fatigue. She should have set the lines in the lake to begin with. No driftwood on the shore, but plenty of bones, the blotchy skull of a bear, the white skeletons of seals. After making a fire, she smoked her clothes and gear to make their scent less foresty. She ate a handful of mussels off the rocks and some slimy kelp, unwrapped her bow, polished it with hazelnut oil from the horn in her medicine pouch. At least I've got you, she mumbled. She still missed her old bow, which Finkedin had made for her, and she gave this one lots of attention so it wouldn't feel left out. Clumsily she overturned the canoe, piled stones against the sides and wriggled underneath. Grey daylight seeped through the deer hide. Ice clinked in the shallows. Behind it the immense silence of the far north. Rip and Wreck had not come back. She had relied on them to warn her of danger, but why should they now, when she'd shunned her clan? She pictured demons and hidden people emerging from the rocks, ice bears swimming stealthily ashore. It was too painful to think of Torak, so she thought about Wolf and Darkfur at the river, teaching the cubs to hunt. Salmon were good prey for beginners, no nasty antlers or hooves to hurt small bodies. Unwinding Torak's headband, she sniffed his smell of sweat and wolves and pine blood. By now he must have found out why she'd left, but did he know how much she hated doing it, how fiercely it hurt? She saw him coming after her. She saw his long dark hair and lean brown face with its wolf clan tattoos, 2 dotted lines along his cheekbones, with the thin scar, cutting the left one to cancel it out. She saw the green flecks in his light grey eyes, from when he'd spirit-walked in trees. Would he ever forgive her for lying to him? She was woken by wing beats, a splash, and the honking of swans. The scar on the back of her hand was itching. Her fingers felt gritty. When she wriggled out of her sleeping sack, a stub of charcoal crunched under her knee. The sun lay low on the amber sea. In the fire, a piece of birch bark was smouldering. Someone had scratched Torak's forest mark on it in charcoal over and over in anger. With a cry, Renn grabbed the bark and flung it in the lake. She'd broken the spell just in time. If the fire had eaten even one of those marks, it might have done Torak great harm. To her horror, her hands were black with charcoal. "I didn't do it," she cried. And yet, who else was there? And where would you find birch bark and charcoal in a land without trees? Running to the sea, she scrubbed her hands. Her fishing lines were back in the shallows. That wasn't right. She'd put them in the lake. Yet here they were, and they'd caught something. A sob rose in her throat. It was the whiskery seal. It was dead. This was her fault. Now she had to cut up the carcass and use every part. Baring her teeth, she drew her knife and slit the fat grey belly. She sprang to her feet. From the mess of guts slid a viper. It hissed and vanished into the kelp. "This can't be happening," thought Renn. A figure sat by the fire, with its back to her. As Renn edged closer, the figure turned, and she saw the beautiful, heartless face of her mother. "You're dead," said Renn. "You were killed 3 summers ago. I watched you die." Seshru's black lips twisted in her sideways smile. "So?" Chapter 5. "What are you?" whispered Renn. "Don't you know?" taunted Seshru. She sat cross-legged by the fire, slowly pouring ash from palm to palm. She was barefoot, in a sleeveless tunic of silver sealskin, and though snow fell thickly, none touched her long dark hair or her smooth pale arms. The viper tattoo on her brow was a vertical line of arrowheads, set point to point, and her dark blue gaze held Renn's with the fixity of a snake. "Interesting disguise," she remarked. "You look better with black hair, like mother, like daughter." "You're not real," said Renn. Putting out her hand, she passed it through her mother's face as if it was smoke. "Are you sure?" The viper mage blew on the embers, loosing a flurry of sparks. One burnt Renn's cheek. "If I'm not real, how could you feel that?" Renn shielded her face with both arms, exposing the zigzag tattoos on her wrists that warded off evils. "You're dead. I saw you die." Seshru's shoulders shook with silent laughter. "You keep saying that." "I hated you when you were alive. I still do. You broke my father's heart. If he hadn't gone looking for you, he wouldn't have died on the ice. Your father was weak. You wanted to put a demon in me and make me your Tokaroth, your creature, to obey your every command. And now, look at you," sneered her mother, "a snug little mated pair with your wolf boy. Although we both know that's not perfect. You want to be with your clan. He can't wait to leave. It'll never work." Flicking out her pointed black tongue, she tasted Renn's unease. "And now you've left him, as I left your father." "I had to. He was in danger." "Yes, from you. All that rage bubbling inside you. I'm not angry with Torak, really. Those accidents in the forest, that charm just now, burning his mark. You're behind this. That's why you're here." Her mother's gaze slid sideways. "A snake can still bite when you cut off its head. But what intrigues me is that you never confided in your wolf boy. You're good at secrets. You get that from me. I get nothing from you." More noiseless laughter. daughter, why fool yourself? You can run all the way to the edge of the world. It'll never be far enough. You can't run from what's in your marrow. Why are you here? Renn said coldly. Finally, you ask, why? Well, that's good. That's what mages do. I don't need praise from you. The Viper Mage regarded her. Do you remember the day I died? You knelt beside me as I lay with an arrow in my breast. Your face was wet with rain, not tears. Seshru smiled. Oh, I know. You'd have shot me yourself if someone hadn't beaten you to it. Again she poured handfuls of ash. People were frightened. They didn't dare come near me. But not you and the wolf boy. You heard what I said as I died. This is not the end. What do you mean? Renn's voice cracked. You're dead. The Soul Eaters are dead. So are their Tokaros. You don't exist. There will come a time when you wish I did. When you wish you were only up against me. At least I was human. Is that why you're here? Snarled Renn. To warn me? What do you think? What was this woman, this thing before her? Renn's thoughts flew to the day she'd put the death marks on her mother, the smell of wet earth blood as she drew the circles on Seshru's forehead, breast and heels to keep her souls together. Hadn't the death marks worked? If Seshru had lost her name soul, she would be a ghost. If she'd lost her clan soul, she'd be a demon. If she'd lost her world soul, she would have snapped her link with trees, hunters and prey. She would be drifting forever beyond the stars. I'm not a lost one, said Seshru, as if Renn had spoken aloud, and I'm not a demon or a ghost. In a supple movement she rose and spread her hands, and at her command the ash lifted and whirled around her in a glittering cloud. Her hair was a writhing mane of serpents. Her empty eyes pierced Renn's. You're a dream, said Renn. Well done, mocked Seshru. But don't you know what that means? The ashes blew apart. Seshru was gone. It means I'm inside you, she hissed in Renn's head. You can't ever be rid of me. I'm part of who you are. Renn woke, standing by the dead fire. Clouds hid the sun, wind roughened the surface of the lake. The Viper Mage was gone, but her venom lingered. Renn was shaking, her hands were black with charcoal. A piece of birch bark floated on the lake. It bore traces of Torak's marks, so that part had been real. She must have scrawled them in her sleep and laid the bark on the fire. Was it possible her mother was right, that deep down she was angry with Torak, and wished him harm? No, she said aloud. No, you'll never make me believe that. I'd never hurt Torak. At the lake she cupped water and drank. She filled her water skin. Her fishing lines were here in the lake, after all. She'd caught nothing, but she spotted a ptarmigan in the rocks and shot it. When you make a kill, you must thank the prey and use every part of it. This is the pact, the oldest law of all. Hunters must treat the prey with respect, and in return the world spirit will send more prey. Renn thanked the bird and wished its spirit peace. She tucked the innards under a stone as an offering and ate the liver and heart raw. She skinned the body and legs and roasted them. Then, to save time, she wrapped the bones in the feathered skin and put it on the other side of the lake, and soon afterwards an eagle swooped and carried it off. Renn took that as a good sign. Honouring the pact steadied her. But she couldn't forget what Seshru had said. This is not the end. What had she meant? At the shore, Renn braved the cold and took off her parka and leggings, then scrubbed every trace of the dream off her skin with wet kelp, which she threw in the shallows. Having dressed, she ate the ptarmigan. Her mother's great skill had been to make people believe her lies. Well, not this time. Renn would not be turned from her purpose. Whatever was trying to hurt Torak, be it a demon or something else, she would find it and make it stop. And if that meant going to the edge of the world, that was what she would do. She had an idea. Spreading her long hair on a rock, she took her knife and cut it short. She tied Torak's headband round her temples. There. Now, her face in the lake was nothing like her mother's. Hair holds part of your world's soul, so you mustn't let it fall into the wrong hands. Renn tied hers around a stone and lobbed it into the sea. It would come to no harm there, and it might make amends to the sea-mother for her gear and the deer-hide canoe. A sleek grey head poked out of the water and shook its extravagant whiskers. Renn smiled. "I'm glad you're all right. Sorry I killed you in my dream." The seal rolled over and floated on its back. In its front flippers it held a scarlet crab, which it proceeded to munch. Renn hoped this meant the sea-mother had forgiven her for the canoe. The sea-eagle tattoo on her hand had faded a bit, so she renewed it with lichen, then rubbed more ash on her mourning marks. Her disguise didn't feel quite as wrong as it had before. She still had her raven feathers under the others, and her medicine pouch was raven skin. It's against clan law to kill your clan creature, but she'd found a dead one in the forest. In the pouch was the tiny bag she'd sewn before she left, which held tufts of underfur from wolf and dark fur, and a milk tooth from each of the cubs. On a thong at her neck hung the duck-bone whistle, which Torak had whittled for her last summer. When she blew it, she heard no sound, but Wolf could hear it, and so could Rip and Wreck. Renn blew it. At first she caught nothing but the hiss of wind in marsh grass. Then a powerful swish of wings, and Rip lit down and greeted her with a bow and a throaty gurgle. Wreck perched on her shoulder and ran a lock of her hair gently through her bill. The raven was no longer disconcerted by her disguise. "Greetings, little guardians," Renn said with a bow. "Glad you've realized I'm still me. Please, don't stay away again." The fog arrived without warning, creeping up on her as she paddled north. Within moments it was so thick she couldn't see the end of the canoe. When it thinned, she was startled to see how far she drifted from the coast. She tried to turn, but the current wouldn't let her. It was a flat, pale green, nothing like the choppy blue water she'd just left, and it was trying to drag her out to sea. "Don't fight it," called a voice. "Turn level with the shore and keep going. You'll be all right." Renn did as he said. Through the shifting whiteness she made out a hunter in a long grey skin boat. "Not far to go. You're nearly clear," he shouted. He was right. Feeling a bit foolish, she shouted her thanks. The whale clan had taught her about riptides. "I can't believe I forgot what to do." Grinning, he paddled closer and threw back his hood. "You probably don't get many riptides in the forest." He was about her own age, and quite extraordinarily handsome. His fair hair hung in many braids about his shoulders, and his light blue eyes were striking in his wind-burnt face. His clan tattoos were 2 fine black lines from the corners of his mouth to his jaw, and he maintained a respectful distance as he held up his palm in friendship. "I'm Nigin, of the Narwhal clan. I can tell by your speech that you're from the far south. What name do you carry?" Renn hesitated. "I'm Ryu, of the Sea Eagles." To her relief, it no longer felt wrong. Her name's hole was secure. Inside, She was still Renn of the Raven clan. Chapter 6. Torak swerved to avoid a lump of black ice, and Wolf nearly fell overboard. Torak growled at him to sit, but Wolf ignored him. His eyes were bulging, and he was panting in alarm. To reassure him, Torak stretched and yawned. It didn't work. It had taken a lot to persuade Wolf into the canoe, and he still hated it. He was scared of the sea, and he kept hearing giant fish howling in the deep. Finkedin had warned Torak about whales. In summer they swim close to the shore to scratch their bellies, and if you see seabirds screaming above a patch of sea, stay clear. It means whales are feeding underneath. Twice a whale had surfaced so close they'd nearly capsized, and a while ago the wind had done its best to smash them against an iceberg. It was a warning. The far north was telling them to go back to the forest. As the sun didn't set in this strange land, Torak had lost track of the days. He was gripped by the fear that he would never find Renn. He couldn't imagine being without her. Even when they were with others, they'd only to exchange a glance across the fire to feel the bond between them. What if that never happened again? He was also sharply aware that while she had prepared for her journey, he had not. He needed warm, seaworthy clothes, and a skin boat made of whalebone and seal hide that wouldn't anger the sea mother, but so far he hadn't met anyone to make the trade. He knew people lived here, the ptarmigans, the narwhal and walrus clans, his friends, the white foxes. Where were they all? To make matters worse, his waterskin was empty, and though the cliffs scowling down at him were veined with waterfalls, he couldn't find anywhere to land. From a sea cave ahead came a weird, booming roar, although from what Torak could make out, there was nothing inside but boulders. What sort of a land was this, where even boulders roared? Wolf's ears were flat against his skull, his tail clamped between his legs. "Woof!" he warned. 3 of what Torak had sought were boulders, lumbered into the sea and swam towards them, spouting spray. They swam fast, a huffing snort off the prow, and a head bobbed up. The creature was covered in warts, and from its pouchy upper lip jutted 2 sturdy yellow tusks as long as Torak's forearm. Its dark eyes were harder than pebbles. Finkedin had warned him about walruses too. They don't eat people, but if you get too close, they'll kill. "I'm not hunting you," Torak told the walrus. With a grunt, it dived, displaying a mottled bulk twice the size of a canoe as it sank out of sight. Its companions had also vanished. Uneasily, Torak and Wolf peered into the dark green water. The walruses could be anywhere. He hadn't paddled far when they bobbed up again, some distance behind. Rearing above the waves, they stared at Torak until he'd paddled well past their cave. By now he was desperately thirsty, and Wolf's flanks were heaving. They came to a stream crashing down a cliff, with a strip of shore beneath, but as Torak paddled towards it, Wolf growled. His hackles were stiff, and he was gazing intently at the cliff top. Torak craned his neck and locked eyes with the biggest ice bear he'd ever seen. She stood high above, her long claws gripping the edge. Her chest and muzzle were stained yellow with blubber, her nose crisscrossed with scars. Her flat, black stare never left Torak as she tasted his scent with her dark grey tongue. Clumsily, he paddled backwards. The ice bear shifted from paw to paw, seeking a way down to this temptingly easy prey. 2 fluffy white cubs appeared either side of her and peered curiously at Torak. Their mother swung her long neck. Obediently, they backed out of sight. Snuffing, licking the air, the bear extended one massive forepaw and clawed for a foothold. Pebbles skittered and bounced. She drew back with a hiss. Too steep. Torak sped off before she changed her mind. His hands on the paddle were slippery with sweat. He had encountered ice bears before, and he knew the raging power of their blood hunger. To an ice bear, All other creatures are prey. And summer was their leanest time. In winter they hunted seals hauled out of the frozen sea, but now there was no sea ice, which meant fewer seals and hungrier bears. As Torak paddled north, white patches dotting the land took on a sinister significance. Was that driftwood on the shore, or a sleeping bear? Was that ice on the fells? Was it? Passing a headland, he saw a bear amble into the sea. He slowed, straining to see which way it swam. Only the very top of its head showed, and the slightest wave hid it from view. He thought he spotted it swimming south, but as he dug in his paddle, the sun came out, and every glinting wave became a bear. He was glancing over his shoulder for the 10th time, when a shuddering jolt nearly pitched him overboard. Too late, he saw the black iceberg lurking under the waves. The canoe crumpled like an eggshell, and the sea rushed in. Torak huddled naked in a cave above the shore, teeth chattering uncontrollably as he hacked a strip off his sleeping sack for a foot binding. Wolf was leaning against his back to warm him up, while in front he was scorchingly close to the blaze he'd woken from a pile of driftwood. He was lucky. The sea mother had spat him into the shallows, taking the canoe and his boots, but sparing his life. He still had his weapons, gear, and the pouch of earth's blood. He was going to need it more than ever. His jerkin and leggings hung from stakes dripping onto the flames. When he put them on, they were still damp, so he tied them off at elbows and knees with a spare bowstring and stuffed them full of grass. It was scratchy and crawling with insects, but it would keep him alive. No one in the far north travels overland in summer, and no one wears eelskin clothes. Too bad. He hadn't met anyone to make a trade, and he didn't have time to stop and make better gear for himself. The wind nearly knocked him over as he made his way onto the fells, ripping the warmth from his flesh and making his skull ache. Wolf slitted his eyes but didn't feel the cold. Already his underfur was thicker, his pelt as fluffy as if it was winter. The ground turned marshy, and the wind went off to maul someone else. Midges swarmed. Wolf bounded across the bog and sat furiously scratching, while Torak jumped grimly from tussock to tussock. He sank into sticky black mud, yanked his foot free. It came away without his foot binding. Same with the other. Sweaty and midge-bitten, he finally reached firmer ground, and the wind came roaring back. This was hopeless. He was still within arrow-shot of the shore. The whole of this horrible, treeless land was against him. Wind, sea, walruses, ice bears, the earth itself. For the first time since leaving the forest, he was angry with Renn. They had shared everything together. At times they'd laughed so much they'd cried. At others they'd spoken of their fathers and how deeply they missed them. How could she do this? A shadow slid over him. He gasped. The wind was so strong he could barely stand, and yet the great white owl hovered perfectly still. In the past, Torak had been forced to kill a snow owl. Seeing one now made him feel guilty. He was glad when it glided away across the fells. Wolf had run ahead and was nowhere in sight. Torak felt eyes on him and turned. 2 skin boats were rocking in the shallows. Each was manned by 4 boys about his own age in parkas and leggings of stained grey hide. All had the flat, round, wind-darkened faces of the people of the far north, and all were scowling at him. Warily he raised a hand in greeting. One boy jabbered something that sounded like a clatter of stones. The other sniggered. Torak realized he must look ridiculous with his clothes stuffed full of grass, like the clumsy turf men the ice clans raise to honour the wind. "My name's Torak," he called. "Can you understand me?" The boy who'd spoken squared his shoulders. Even from a distance he stank of rancid blubber. His face was shiny with it, his eyes permanently slitted against the wind. His clan tattoos were 2 black lines from mouth to chin, like a grimace. "Although," He struck his chest with his fist. "Narwhal clan." "What are you?" Torak didn't feel like explaining about being clanless, so he said he was from the forest in the south. "I have earth blood to trade, for clothes and a skin boat. Can you help?" The boy called Orvo stared as if he'd asked for the moon. "You want a skin boat?" "I said I'll trade." "Narwhals don't trade skin boats." "All right, maybe someone else will. If not, I'll walk." Orvo spoke to the others in his own speech, and they burst out laughing. "Walk?" cheered Orvo. "Walking's for women and soft bellies." Torak looked at him. "What's a soft belly?" "You from the far south, get in the boat." "Why?" "That's the rule. Strangers go to the boat leader. He's my uncle," he added proudly. "Don't worry, soft belly. He won't hurt you. He'll just send you back south. You're not tough enough for the far north." Chapter 7. The Narwhal boys took Torak's weapons and hustled him into Orvo's skin boat. As they headed north, Torak spotted Wolf following on land. The narwhals didn't notice. They passed a bay where a gaggle of younger boys toiled up and down, dragging what appeared to be rocks roped to their waists. "Walrus skulls," muttered Orvo. "When they're older, they'll drag a boulder. Then a whale skull." "Why?" said Torak. "It's the rule." Torak asked how come he spoke southern, and Orvo said it was a rule, but someone had to trade with other clans. The narwhals had lots of rules. Boys must be raised by their uncles instead of their fathers, because uncles punished more harshly. When the first frosts came, they had to sleep in the open and stand at the edge of the great crag to conquer fear. "And when my father's father got too old to hunt," he boasted, "I had to watch the elders strangle him." "Why?" "To make me strong. The weak die, the tough survive. Soft bellies like you wouldn't last long." "Why do you call us that?" "Because you're weak. You can't even eat our food." "How do you know?" "I've never tried it." Orvo bared his teeth. "You will." Torak's silence seemed to annoy him. "Don't you have rules in this forest of yours?" "Not as many as you. What's the point?" "It keeps us alive. Hunting whales is dangerous. 6 men in a boat must act as one." "Don't your people hunt whales?" "There aren't any in the forest." Orvo snorted. "Must be a poor place." "It's where your driftwood comes from." "No, it isn't. Driftwood comes from the sea." "Yes, but before that it was trees." Another snort. "What are these trees?" "I don't believe in them. Driftwood is giant kelp from the sea." Torak gave up. They rounded a headland into a swirl of wood smoke and the stench of middens, and he saw hundreds of shelters strung along the coast. This is where all the people had been. They were gathered for a clan meet. Orvo said that as narwhals and walruses were sea hunters, they got the best campsites on the ridge by the river. The ptarmigans, who hunted reindeer and hare, took the boggy ground, while soft bellies, like the kelps, had to camp near the dung heaps. Torak asked if there was anyone from the White Fox clan, but they were putting into the shallows, and there was no more time for talk. The noise was overwhelming, men haggling over piles of eider ducks and blocks of mashed dried berries, women scrutinizing hides for holes, sniffing skins full of whale oil, prodding sides of smoked reindeer. The boys jostled Torak past racks of wind-dried cod, and he came face to face with the strangest fish he'd ever seen, as big as a man, and weirdly flattened. Both its bulging eyes were on the same side of its head. "Halibut," said Orvo. "Don't you have them in your forest?" Torak ignored that. The narwhal campsite was at the far end of the clan meet, and weirdly silent. No talk, no laughter, even the dogs were subdued. Above the shore towered 5 pairs of whales' jawbones, each supporting a skin boat that could take 6 men. A boy ground charcoal with blubber. An old man painted a walrus on a boat, probably for hunting luck. He was missing 3 fingers, Torak guessed from frostbite. On the shore, bare-chested narwhal men butchered a walrus, while women toiled over the skin. The walrus had the thickest hide of any creature Torak had encountered. The women had laboriously split it through its thickness, stopping just before the other end and opening it out to double it in size. They were scraping it clean with flakes of black flint, and would cure it by rubbing in the creature's mashed brains piled nearby. Torak saw another woman standing in a rawhide vat of urine, kneading a seal hide with her bare feet. Her companions were making rope, cutting hide in spiral strips and chewing to render it pliable. All the women had cropped hair, long maggot-eaten robes, and grim expressions. At Orvo's approach they shuffled fearfully out of his way. A girl with a withered arm wasn't quick enough, and Orvo would have struck her if Torak hadn't grabbed his shoulder. "She didn't do anything," he protested. Angrily, Orvo shook him off. "A half-man gets out of the way, that's the rule." "A what?" "A half-man. A female." The girl looked about 10 summers old. She resembled an anxious squirrel with pouchy cheeks and prominent teeth, half hidden by a bone disc that hung from her pierced upper lip. She stared at Torak as if she couldn't believe he'd tried to help her. She was still staring as he followed over to the narwhal's shelter. This was a massive tent of split walrus hides crisscrossed with ropes lashed to boulders. Above the entrance was fixed a tusk as straight as a spear. Torak guessed it was that of a narwhal. "This shelter's only a summer one," muttered Orvo. "The camp of our ancestors of Wygo is much bigger." Torak had never heard of any clan naming a campsite. He was thinking how odd that was when he saw what was planted on a stake by the shelter, the bloody, fly-blackened head of a wolf. His world tilted, and then he noticed that this wolf's muzzle was white, its teeth worn to stumps. He turned to Orvo. "Why would you do this? What harm did this old wolf do you?" Orvo bristled. "Demons hide in wolves. Everyone knows that." "Nonsense. Wolves fight demons. What do you know about wolves or demons? Get inside." The horror of the slaughtered wolf stayed with Torak as he crawled after Orvo into the shelter. In the forest it's forbidden to kill a hunter, but not in the far north. It had never occurred to Torak that this meant they might kill wolves. He found himself in a chilly outer chamber. Orvo said it was where the half-men slept. Torak bumped against a stack of barbed-boned harpoons. "Don't touch," warned Orvo. "They're poisoned." They pushed past a heavy walrus hide hanging into the men's chamber. It was bigger and warmer, muskox pelts strewn around a driftwood fire. From the smoke-hole dangled a carved narwhal of polished bone about a hand long. It swam amid waves of blue smoke. Orvo knelt before it and touched his forehead to the ground. Through the fog, Torak saw 6 bare-chested, blubber-smeared men sitting cross-legged in the gloom. Their faces were purpled by wind and cold, and their clan tattoos gave them permanent scowls. All were beardless, with 1 or more red dots tattooed on their chins. The pock-marked man in the middle had 7. Orvo said each dot meant that the man had killed a whale, and the pock-marked man was his uncle, the boat leader. The boy was whispering. He'd left his swagger outside. The boat leader barked at him in their stony speech, and Orvo turned to Torak. "He says we eat first, then talk." 2 girls crawled in, dragging a bulging seal skin, then shuffled out. The boat leader slit the skin with his knife, and he and the others pulled out fistfuls of dark red slime. "Eat," Orvo urged Torak with his mouth full. "What is it?" said Torak. "Kiviak. We pack a seal skin with guillemots and seal flippers and leave it to rot for the summer. Eat." They were watching him. He could see the challenge in their eyes. He scooped a gooey handful of rancid fat and clotted blood. The smell made his eyes water. He crammed it into his mouth, forced it down, burst out coughing. The narwhals roared with laughter and scooped more kiviak, sucking and munching with exaggerated relish. You see how tough we are. Already Torak was feeling dizzy. In the forest, the clans brewed drinks that had the same effect as this rotten meat. He always avoided them. He didn't want his souls to wander. It seemed that for the narwhals, getting drunk was the point. "My uncle says you're not eating enough." Orvo's speech was slurred. "He says you're weak, like all soft bellies." Torak told him to ask if he could trade Earthblood for a skin boat. He asked why you want to go north. "I'm looking for my mate." "Who took her?" "No one took her. She left." This provoked cries of outrage. "If one of our half-men left, we'd kill her." "That's not our way," said Torak. "You're even weaker than we thought. Go back south. Get a new mate." Torak struggled to keep his temper. "Have you seen her? She has red hair, and she's seeking the edge of the world." This enraged the boat leader. He thrust his face at Torak, spattering him with kiviak. "No soft belly may seek the edge of the world." "Why not?" "This would anger the spirits of Mammut." "Mammut!" cried the narwhals, touching filthy fingers to the walls. For the first time Torak saw that they were covered in paintings of strange, lumpy creatures. Their legs were as thick as tree trunks, their massive tusks curved out and then in again, and their long, thin noses snaked all the way to their stumpy feet. "They belong to the deep past," Finkedin had said, "but the ancestors killed too many, and they died out." Occasionally a narwhal hunter finds a carcass frozen in the earth. These ancient creatures are sacred. Narwhals call them Mammut. The boat leader was ranting, dangerously drunk. Orvo was struggling to keep up. "Far over the sea from Wygo lies the land no narwhal has ever seen. They say that fiery cracks gape on the other world, and only the spirits of long-dead Mammut keep the demons inside. You will sleep now, soft belly. Then you'll slink back to your forest, and you will go on foot." Arguing was pointless. Torak watched the men gobble the last of the kiviak, then pass out, one by one. He curled up on the other side of the fire and slid into evil dreams. He dreamt that Wolf hung skewered on a stake, accusing him with dead white eyes. "You should have warned me, pack brother." "It's only a dream," Renn whispered in his ear. She lay in front of him with her back against his chest. "I missed you," he murmured, breathing her wonderful, sharp, junipery scent. He bent to kiss her spine, but instead of the little smooth bumps that he loved, his lips touched slimy, rotten flesh. He woke with a shudder. The wind had risen. The walls of the shelter were slapping noisily. The narwhal men lay on their backs, snoring. The roof could have fallen in and they wouldn't have woken. No point stealing weapons and a skin boat. They'd only catch him, and he couldn't ignore that dream. Wolf's head on the stake. "Should have warned me, pack brother." He had to find Wolf and tell him to stay away, or the narwhals would kill him. As Torak crawled into the icy outer chamber, he had to pick his way around sleeping women. Only the girl with the withered arm was awake, furtively plucking maggots from a chunk of putrid meat and cramming them in her mouth. When she saw Torak, she froze. Signing her to silence, he slipped out to warn Wolf. The thunderer was growling in the up, and the great wet was clawing the shore. Lemmings and rock squirrels scurried for their burrows. Wolf had to find shelter too, but he was hungry, and there were lots of fish near the great dens of the Taluses. Wolf had known since he was a cub that Taluses were very like wolves. They live in packs, and hunt to feed their families. They're clever. They love talking and playing, and sometimes their young do foolish things and get killed. But unlike wolves, tailesses sleep for ages, which makes it easy to steal their fish. Wolf was seeking a way past the dogs when he saw Tall Talus running towards him. No time for greetings. Tall Talus told Wolf to get away now, or the tailesses would kill him. Wolf was astonished. Tailesses don't hunt wolves. But his pack brother meant it, so he went. By now the thunder was roaring in the up, the great wet attacking the shore with huge white paws. Wolf had to find shelter fast. He hadn't gone far when he spotted a hollow in the bank above the fast wet. As he scrambled in, he smelt prey. Yes, prey, buried in his hollow, and deliciously rotten. Wolf began to dig, thrusting aside the frozen earth with powerful forepaws. He forgot the howling wind and the thunderous fury. He smelt that this prey was bigger than the biggest bison, and very, very old. Lightning flared and thunder cracked. The world spirit slashed the sky, and rain pelted down, soaking Torak. The wind was savaging shelters and ripping boats from their moorings. People were hurrying to rescue their belongings, but at the narwhal camp nobody stirred. One of their skin boats had been torn from its arch. It was rolling along the shore like a birch-bark toy. Frightened women huddled outside the shelter, but there was no sign of their men, who were still sleeping off the kivyak. Torak crawled inside and grabbed Orvo's shoulder. "Wake up! You're losing your boats!" The boy curled into a ball and scowled in his sleep. Torak crawled out again, shouted at the women to help. They didn't understand, or maybe they feared to obey a soft belly. Floundering through mounds of slippery kelp, Torak went after the boat. Someone ran up behind him. The girl with the withered arm was strong for her size and determined, and together they overturned the boat and flung in rocks to weigh it down, then struggled back to the other boats. The girl fetched rope. As she and Torak fought to secure the first craft, Orvo emerged blinking from the shelter. "Get more rope!" yelled Torak. Orvo dived back inside and returned moments later with the men. By the time the storm had blown over, all the boats had been saved, although the one on the shore had a rent that would take days to repair. Women brought dry clothes for the men, but when the girl with the withered arm offered Torak a dry parka, the boat leader sent her running with a glare. He hated being beholden to a soft belly. Torak would get no thanks for saving the boats. He was trudging towards the shelter when a woman jabbered an alarm and pointed inland. The men ran for their weapons. Torak's belly turned over. Wolf hadn't fled for the fells. He was halfway up the riverbank, well within arrow shot, as he tore at a half-buried carcass. "Don't shoot!" yelled Torak, flinging himself in front of the men. "Out of our way!" shouted Orvo. "We have to kill the demon!" Torak put his hands to his mouth and howled, "Danger! Run!" Wolf was gone in a flash, flying like a grey ghost over the fells. The narwhal's arrows thudded harmlessly into the bank. All eyes turned on Torak. Within moments he was surrounded by a thicket of spears. "You talked to the demon," said Orvo. "He's not a demon. He's my pack brother." But he could see they didn't believe him. Over his shoulder he saw the carcass which had nearly killed Wolf. A leg like a tree trunk ended in a huge round foot. A gash in thick earth-coloured hide revealed flesh as dark as horse meat. But this was no horse. Torak thought fast. "Orvo, tell them this proves Wolf is no demon. No demon would go near Mammoth, let alone eat it." But the narwhals had seen for themselves. "Mammoth," they muttered, touching their foreheads as they hurried past Torak to dig out the sacred remains. They were still at work when he saw a man on the shore walking towards them. As fat as a well-nourished seal, the man had a black stripe tattooed across his nose, which marked him as a member of the White Fox clan. Torak ran to meet him. "Inuktiluk," he cried. The elder man grinned. "I just heard you were here." Turning to the boat leader, he had a brief exchange in narwhal. Then to Torak, They might seem ungrateful, but you've won their respect. He says you can have a skin boat and a safe passage stick for you and Wolf as far as Wye go. You're lucky. They rarely give those to anyone." His grin widened. "And before you ask, yes, Renn passed this way. And she sends you a message." Chapter 8. "What did she say?" cried Torak. "Is she all right?" "Patience," chuckled Inuktitut. "She was here not 2 days ago." "Only 2 days?" "She'd lost her way among the islands. It slowed her down." "What did she say?" "I don't know. I was out fishing. Tanujak saw her." "Where's Tanujak?" "Picking mushrooms on the fell. She'll be back soon." Torak let out a roar. To the white foxes, soon could mean anything, from a day to half a moon. Inuktitut clapped him on the back. "You're too thin, Torak. You need to be fat to survive up here. I told you before. Come and eat while we wait for Tanujak." The white foxes were camped at the other end of the clan meet. Children chased each other round the shelter of brown and white seal hide, and sled dogs, recognizing Torak's scent, sprang up with yowly greetings. Inside, Torak found himself in the cheerful din of a white fox day meal. Tanujak wasn't back. It was a relief to be with people who enjoyed eating and laughing. White fox boys weren't forced to drag walrus skulls, and when they got into scrapes, their elders simply ignored them till they came to their senses. White fox hunters happily jumbled up prey from land and sea, and men and women got along as equals. Inuktitut smiled at the narwhal's belief that they were better than everyone else. The sun doesn't give them any more light than the rest of us. Torak realized he was hungry. He wolfed a bowl full of reindeer fat, whipped with crowberries and herring livers, and a crunchy pale green mess pickled in seawater that Inuktitut called roseroot. Soon the others returned to the clan meet, leaving the two of them alone. While Inuktitut ladled willow herb tea into kelp beakers, Torak put on the warm clothes they'd given him, his eelskin ones having been taken and fed to the dogs. He was chewing a slab of oily black whale meat when a short, plump woman crawled into the shelter. She wore a cape of blue teal feathers, and her belt jingled with tiny bone carvings from all the people she'd helped. Her brown face was creased with laughter lines, and she had the bright slanted eyes of her clan creature. She gave Torak a friendly, penetrating glance. He stopped eating. "Tell me everything," he said to Tanujak, the white fox mage. "She doesn't want you to find her," Tanujak said calmly. Torak blinked. "That's all she said. There's a reason she cut off her hair and dyed it black. There's a reason she goes by the name of Ryu of the Sea Eagles. Don't be angry with her." "I'm not. Anger is a form of madness. It won't help either of you." "But she must have told you something." Tanujak glanced at Inuktitut. "She asked me to read the signs to find out where she should go. And I had a message from the people beyond the clouds, from the dead," she explained. "I told Renn, so I'll tell you. To find what you seek, you must put the island of wings to flight and cross the forest in the treeless land. You must save the past by burning the present." Torak groaned. "I hate riddles." Tanujak smiled. "That's what Renn said." Torak could hear exactly how she'd said it. He missed her so much it hurt. "Why did you let her leave?" he burst out. "Let? You sound like a narwhal. Renn chose to leave." "Why are you scratching that scar on your arm?" "Because it's itchy." "How did you get it?" "A bear, which has nothing to do with—" "Show me." After taking his forearm in her plump hands, she drew a chip of yellow stone from her medicine pouch and crumbled it to dust in her fingers. It smelt sharply of rotten eggs as she rubbed it on his scar. "We call this bloodstone because when it burns, it leaves a scarlet stain. I'll give you some. It helps against demons and fleas." "You don't think I should go after her?" Torak said accusingly. "What good would it do?" put in Inuktitut, who until now had listened in silence. "Look at me, Torak," said Tanujek. Reluctantly he met her bright, steady gaze. "How long since you spirit-walked?" "Not for 2 summers, but in your eyes I see traces of souls not your own." "That's what happens when you spirit walk," he said impatiently. "But that's in the past. You have to help me find Renn." "It's not easy to put the past behind you." I told Renn the same thing. She didn't listen either. "I can't go back to the forest without her." "But it's more dangerous for you." She touched her collar of white feathers. "My spirit guide is the snow owl, the guardian of the far north. It doesn't want you here. I don't know why. Do you?" Torak thought of the snow owl he'd killed. He shook his head. Tanujek sighed. "If you survive, it'll be by doing what you do best, by thinking like other creatures." "More riddles," he growled. "No, just common sense." "Renn will be all right," said Inuktitut. "Naigin will look after her." Torak looked at him. "Who's Naigin?" The white foxes exchanged startled glances. "You didn't know," said Tanujek. "No what? Who's Naigin?" "A young hunter of the Narwhal clan," said Inuktitut. "He and Renn arrived together. They left together, too." "But surely the Narwhals told you that." "You've no reason to be jealous," said Tanujek. "We know Naigin. Renn's safe with him." "Oh, I'm sure," snarled Torak. "I've seen how Narwhals treat women." "Naigin's different," she insisted. "He doesn't even look like them. His mother wasn't from the far north. When he was a boy, his father sent him to us to learn our ways." "I fostered him myself," said Inuktitut. "He's brave, clever, and the best hunter in his clan." Somehow that didn't make Torak feel any better. "Naigin knows the far north," said Inuktitut. "Meaning I don't. You were here in winter for less than a moon. In summer, it's a different world. How would you help Renn if you got trampled by a musk ox or eaten by an ice bear?" Torak glowered at the fire. What was Renn doing with a stranger, even if he was the best hunter in his clan? The tent flap was flung back, and Orvo put in his head. "I brought your skin boat." Torak shot him a look. "This Naigin, why didn't you tell me he'd been here with my mate?" "Well, that was for the boat leader to say, not me." Torak blew out a long breath. "Inuktitut, Tanujek, thank you for your help, but I can't go back to the forest. I'm going north." The skin boat was a one-man craft of split walrus hides, sewn with sinew and stretched over a light whalebone frame. It reminded Torak of seal clan boats, except that it wasn't covered at bow and stern. Orvo solemnly showed him the bailer, rope, and fishing gear stowed under the cross struts. He explained that the hides were those of female walruses, as females didn't fight, so their hides weren't weakened by scars. "Now and then you must rub it with snow, or it'll crack when you hit ice, and you will hit ice. Here, these are for you." He held out Torak's axe, knife, and slingshot, the safe passage stick, and a driftwood bow with a quiver, made of woven kelp. The arrows it held were fletched with kittiwake feathers and barbed with glossy black flint. And there was another weapon, 3 rawhide thongs an arm's length long, knotted together at one end and weighted at the other with small slices of bone. These are sling stones. You know how to use them? I think so. My friend Dark showed me how. Wear them round your waist, and tie them with a slip knot. One tug, and you're ready to throw. Why are you telling me this? Said Torak. Waste of gear, if I don't. He paused. Your wolf, he's not my wolf, he's my pack brother. What's that? Like a friend, but closer. Orvo looked puzzled. Stay watchful on the fells, he muttered. In summer brown bears roam the hills, eating mushrooms and berries. Never camp on the shore. Ice bears hunt for carcasses thrown up by the sea, and don't camp by a noisy stream, or you won't hear a bear coming. Torak made a face. That doesn't leave much. The ice river creaked and groaned. Torak heard ice demons booming and hammering to get out. He steered well clear of it, but its freezing breath rocked the skin boat. Wolf sat tensely in front of him. He hated being back in a boat, but he couldn't have followed on land. Only a bird could have crossed this vast, chaotic river of ice. A cold day, although thanks to the white foxes, Torak hardly felt it. If it rained, he could wear his seal-hide parka and leggings with the fur on the outside to repel the wet. If it was cold, he could wear them with the fur against his skin. He also had a fawn-skin jerkin, warm muskox wool socks, and thigh-high boots of bearded seal-hide with tough flipper-skin feet lined with moss. His salmon-skin gauntlets were strung on reindeer tendons so he couldn't lose them, and a pouch at his waist held a spare pair of salmon-skin socks and spiked bone bars to strap to his feet for walking on ice. Tanujak called them raven claws. The white fox's gifts far exceeded the value of the earth blood they'd accepted in return. A waterproof sleeping sack of seal fur, lined with eider duck skins with the feathers left on. A scrap of reindeer fur to sit on in the boat, and best of all, an eye shield of polished antler, with a notch for the bridge of his nose so that it fitted his face. The eye slits were as narrow as knife cuts. As well as shielding him from the glare, they sharpened his sight. Tanujak's final gift was a spare knife, carved like a lemming, gripping the flint blade in its paws. Torak had tied it to his calf under his leggings. Renn did that too. It made him feel closer to her. Thinking of that now, he felt angry and humiliated. Did she miss him as much as he missed her? Did she? Maybe Inuktitut was right, and she was better off with Naigin. But why was she with him at all? Until now, Torak had never been jealous. He'd had no reason to be. Even when Renn had secrets from him, he'd always known he could count on her. And I can now, he told himself firmly. That didn't prevent the fierce heat beating in his blood. He passed a mountain he remembered, 3 black peaks rising from a snowfield like ravens on an ice floe. Somewhere up there was a cave, the Eye of the Viper. 3 winters ago he'd been lucky to get out alive. This was the furthest north he'd ever been. Not even Inuktitut had ventured beyond the 3 peaks. Few clans did, except for the narwhals. Wolf was scratching his flanks again. Torak crumbled a little bloodstone and rubbed it in his pack brother's fur, making them both sneeze. Wolf stopped scratching, but he was still miserable. "Can't we go ashore?" The weather closed in, sea and sky melting to grey obscurity, dotted with islands. Which way to go? It flashed across Torak's mind that he could spirit walk in a bird and find out. But spirit walking was dangerous. He never knew the strength of a creature's souls until he was inside them, and while his name soul and clan soul became bird, his body would be unconscious and vulnerable, only his world soul keeping it alive. Also flying would anger the north wind. Torak had told it he would never fly again. Debating what to do, he paddled into a bay tucked behind a headland. Wolf splashed into the shallows and made for a stream, while Torak hauled the skin boat onto the shingle. A snow owl perched on a rock above the shore. Its yellow eyes were ringed with black, and it glared a warning like an angry ghost. Torak licked his lips. "All right," he called to the guardian of the far north. "I won't spirit walk. I'll fill my water skin and leave." The owl spread its wings and glided away on the wind. Wolf was running up and down by the stream, sniffing. It took Torak no time at all to spot the tracks. A man's booted feet. Torak could tell he was young because the toe prints were deeper than the heels, and beside them the smaller, lighter boot prints of a girl. They were Renn's. Some people fling out their feet like a duck, others turn their feet inwards like a crow. Renn walked in a straight line like a wolf. The tracks were fresh. Torak followed them to a boggy patch where she'd picked cloudberries. Cloudberries were her favourites. It was a joke between them that she never left any for him. She'd stripped these bushes bare, except for a single dark amber berry. Torak put it in his mouth. Burnt honey's sweetness exploded on his tongue. Wolf stood facing the wind. His tail was taut, his head tilted. He'd smelt something other than prey. He glanced at Torak, then back to the headland. Waves crashed against it, and beyond it rose a drift of wind-blown smoke.